and welcome to the Asian American Forward podcast. I am your host, Katie Simpson, here with my usual co-host, Don Sun. And we've both traveled in this last week, so we're excited to talk a little bit about that. But also, on a more serious note, we're hoping that with this episode, we can kind of address the events that have been happening in the past month, particularly with this most recent shooting in Atlanta of 6 women who I think several of them were workers at a massage parlor. So we've talked a little bit about hate crimes before on the show, but we're kind of taking this week to sort of focus on that subject. And I'm really, excited is probably not the right word, but I am interested to hear your thoughts, Don. And so and this is on the front of my mind, not only because of the shooting this past week, but also because when I was in Idaho visiting a family who lived there, I got to visit Minidoka National Historic Site, which is a former Japanese internment camp. So I've never really put that whole history together in my mind. But it's really on the front of my mind now, having been able to visit an internment camp and see the buildings and read quotes from some of the people who were interned there during World War II. So as we get started, Don, first I want to give you an opportunity just to react to the events of this past week. Is there anything that you really want to get off your chest about it?
Yeah, I think it's things is becoming worse and worse. And as I predicted 1 year ago, I think it's when President Donald Trump claimed it's the China virus and it's direct or indirect going to cause the society kind of a fear and hate. Mm-hmm. And now it's becoming worse and worse by day, every day. It's mostly in the Asian concentrated city, and also it's when the economic becoming deteriorated, people mentality become unstable, and more people are going to try to find the channel to explore their anger and fear. And this is the Atlantic cities, the incident happened, and this becoming a massacre, or it's the extremely violence the things happen. And I think it's a react of me. I think we need to emphasize on both the political system and also legal system, try to prevent the development of this kind of a tragedy continue happen in this country.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And these events were particularly tragic. I was hearing in an event that I was actually in this morning about housing insecurity since the pandemic, that a few of the victims of this attack in Atlanta were actually living at the massage parlor. And that was the reason that they were there, because also there wasn't adequate housing for those women, or they weren't able to secure adequate housing. So I think, as we've talked about a lot, and as you bring up, this pandemic has really sort of shone a light on a lot of the issues in our society, and gives us really an opportunity to think about not only our present, but as I'm thinking about having visited Minidoka this week, to reflect on our past in a different way. So I also was really curious, because I know you've done a lot of work on particularly the history of Chinese American immigration to the US and the Chinese Exclusion Act. Is there a way that you see the present kind of rush, or I don't know if rush is the right word, is there a way that you see the present increase in hate crimes targeted towards Asian Americans as connecting with that sort of history of racism in the US?
Unfortunately, my personal opinion is the things is becoming worse and worse, and also the whole society mentality, including the China-US relationship. That's all direct or indirect to cause the whole society mentality or hostility toward the Asian community, especially Chinese community. You see the statistically the violence against the Asian becoming 150 times more than the previous years. So it's every day you see the violence toward the Asian or Chinese community becoming more and more. This is the kind of a trend. Even some politicians at the national level, they have realized that this kind of dangers and voiced their concern, including Congresswoman Grace Meng. She passed the law in the Capitol, the Capitol Hill Congress had passed law, but the senator didn't pass. I think it's maybe this week or next week, senator going to pass the law to condemn the anti-Asian violence. And I think it's at the federal level, and most Asian caucus in the Congress start moving forward. And I think it's below is at the state level and the city level and the local county level. It's this kind of politicians stand up and condemn it. It should be becoming more and more, and the people going to voice their concern and increase the police department, the law enforcement, especially in the legal system. And so far, I think it's the most dangerous part of our government system. It's a very, very challenging for Attorney General for the both state level and the country federal level, and we need find some way to deal with this kind of hate crime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you brought up that study by the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism from California State that found that hate crimes targeted towards Asian people rose by nearly 150% in 2020, and most of that is accounted for by like large metropolitan areas. New York City and LA are kind of the ones that I'm seeing on like headlines. So yeah, and you bring up a really important point about the like legal needs to address hate crimes, but I'm also curious about on the one side, this is like clearly a legal issue because any act of violence like that is something that can be prosecuted. I think there's also with hate crimes in particular sort of this I don't know, cultural or societal aspect to it, because you can prosecute someone for committing an act of violence, but that doesn't necessarily change anybody's mind about whether those acts of violence are justified. So I'm curious also if you have any thoughts about how you think as a culture we should be addressing this kind of issue.
I think it's culture is the second tier consideration. It's at this moment, if you focus on the culture, it's pretty hard to change the mentality of the entire society. And the most focus of mine is always give the people or audience some kind of a direction. Is we need to emphasize on our legal system. If a legal system did not protect the Asian community and the cultural things, is very hard to change unless you have some pretty worst case to prove the crime is a hate crime. Mm-hmm. At this moment, it's very, very hard to distinguish the pure violence or the crime. It's turn into the racial discrimination or racial hate crime. That's kind of the line. We need some case to coming out with the best lawyer to argue in the court to make sure that they can connect two different crime into the hate crime. Otherwise, it's very hard to change the entire society.
Yeah, I hope at least though, maybe by better education and just by continuing to talk about issues like this, that there is at least some change. I mean, I know I'm a fairly young person, so I have seen a lot on my social media just feeds this year about not just like hate crimes against Asian Americans, but also how we can support Black Lives Matter and how you can support people who are coping with homelessness during the pandemic. And so I think there is at least a little bit of hope in that the younger generation is very interested in, at minimum, like talking about these issues and addressing them directly rather than just kind of sweeping it under the rug. But to kind of circle back to internment, I wanted to just give a little bit of historical context in case our audience is unfamiliar. So the kind of, we just barely missed I got to check what year. I think it's 79 year. Yes, we just barely missed the 79-year anniversary of Executive Order 9066, which was signed in February of 1941, 1942. So this was following the December 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor, right? President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the executive order, which ordered the forced removal of 112,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast. 2/3 of those people generally, roughly, actually over 2/3, were American citizens. And yet there was very little protest. This just sort of happened quietly. And the site that I visited, the Minidoka War Relocation Center, was a temporary housing site. People lived there, I believe, through 1945. At its peak, there were 9,397 people interned, and the camp closed officially in October of 1945. And another just like interesting thing to note about the internment camps is the conditions were not terrible. There was like libraries and schools. There's also a lot of inefficiency in terms of plumbing and things of that nature. But I was just really also struck by this statistic that I read, that the amount of homes and businesses that Japanese Americans had to give up likely in 1999 was valued of about $4 to $5 billion. So just the intensity of removing people like this and kind of forcing them from their homes was really it was really striking to see in the landscape of my dad is from a region called the Magic Valley in Idaho. So it's like very flat. And then around the edges of you, it's a flat, high desert. And then around the edges, you can just see mountains. And so it was very striking to visit that and to see like this landscape that people would have been experiencing by force. And so I was also curious if you know anyone who was interned or if you had like done research into it as well.
You know, it's the first generation, their parent, or of course, she's my friend. They have some people, they have been experienced, especially Japanese American, their parent or their grandparent has been in the concentrated camp. Those people finally become a political leader, like in the Silicon Valley, like Mike Honda and the other Japanese senators. They have been realized that if you want to avoid repeat of a history, you have to gain some political power and for all the ethnic group. You visit the Japanese concentrated camp, but it's bring me up to my memories. Last year, I visited Israel, and also I visited the gas chambers there. A lot of millions and millions Jewish community or people, they just by train to send to the gas chambers. Those kind of the scenarios that just refresh my memory. It's the history, especially hate of the human being, and can be repeated. And back to today, I think it's we still a little bit worried this kind of a trend. If we don't stop from a political system, from legal system, things can be repeated. That's the worst things that I'm worried every day.
Yeah, the connections between these events are really interesting and really striking. I also visited a work camp, a Nazi collaborator. There was like a Nazi collaborator government in Yugoslavia, which is where I studied abroad about 2 years ago. And so I got to visit a work camp that had been located there and interned Jews, Roma people, some other groups. And what was really surprising, well, maybe not surprising, but what was really sad to see as the executive order and like the posters that had been posted in like major West Coast cities, like notifying Japanese citizens that they needed to like, pick up their stuff and arrive at the train station at this time or else, was really, really similar to the kinds of signs that I saw when I visited that work camp that were rounding up Jews and other people in Eastern Europe. So I think that it's really important to like acknowledge those similarities and, make sure that we're not sugarcoating things. I was also in doing research for this episode, reading a really interesting GQ article, which I can maybe link in our show notes, that was comparing the pandemic, or sorry, not the pandemic, comparing internment camps to the current situation at the US border with holding immigrant children and families, particularly the family separation policy under the Trump administration. But also the Biden administration has not kept holding people at the borders in these sort of almost concentration camp-like situations.
Yeah, it's actually the current situation bring me to the one of a famous philosopher. I don't know if you study politics. It's Hannah Arendt.
I love Hannah Arendt.
Oh my God, we have a
Yes.
same the passion to one person.
Yeah.
She's really controversial, and also I read almost all her books. On the one side, he's against the dictatorship, but also on the other side is he's the evil of banality, and
The banality of evil.
yeah, well, that's kind of a book. It's really weak. All the Asian American people now, they should read it, because if you don't stand up to the violence, to the crime, things that become worse and worse. And also you see that all the Jewish people, they volunteer in line, go to the train, nobody against it. There's several historical, even in Chinese, when Japanese invade China in the 19 massacre, there have almost 30,000 people. Now 300,000 people has been the massacre, and all people, no single one to fight against it. And also in Indonesia, when Indonesia, there's most of the Chinese immigrant there, they build their business, they concentrate on their own wealthy money and don't involve community, don't involve politics. And then in Indonesia have repeatedly to burn the Chinese, the store, rob Chinese, and the similar things. I think I don't want to predict the worst case, but if Asian or Chinese community in this country, they don't care their neighbor, they don't care other ethnic group, you'll be becoming target, because most of the Asian community or Chinese community, they think they are model minority. They concentrated have a best score in the school, best professional in doctor, lawyer, or engineers. They don't care the neighbors, don't care other ethnic group, don't care social justice for the Black people. That's the bring more and more heat toward this particular group, especially at this moment. The people say pandemic is caused by the Chinese virus, and then it's the migrant to transfer the hate and the fear toward this particular ethnic group. They have no voice and no political power in this country. That's the worst things happen.
Yeah, I love that you're bringing up like all of these complementary examples that sort of mirror the situation with internment and maybe even kind of warn us about our situation now. And yes, 10 out of 10 would recommend Hannah Arendt. So The Banality of Evil is actually from her book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, which just if our listeners don't know, is she was, believe she was reporting for the New Yorker, but she went to Israel to report on the trial of Adolf Eichmann, who was like a top Nazi collaborator who was official. I believe he was in charge of transporting people to the concentration camps. I think that was his specific responsibility. And so the trial has this really interesting exploration also of whether or not he didn't actively and directly kill a single Jew. And yet in this way, he was responsible for the deaths of millions of Jews. And so it's a really interesting examination of how kind of just unquestioningly going along with the system can perhaps lead to some really, really negative things.
Yeah, it's anything related to Hannah Arendt. I'm interested. They have a movie. It's it's a movie about one is the biography of Hannah Arendt, but they have another movie. Is how they kidnap of the what's the guy's name? The Nazi guy, I forgot. Eric.
Oh,
it's from
Eichmann, Eichmann, because he was hiding out in
Argentina.
Argentina.
There's a movie. It's the task force. They have 5 people to fly there and take advantage of an international event and kidnap him and transfer him back to the Israel to have the court, a legal system to prosecute him. And that's the movie. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, the story of how the Mossad kidnapped Eichmann is absolutely fascinating. Yeah. I also read a really interesting biography of Hannah Arendt that was a graphic novel. So it was like a comic book. That was really fun because I've tried to read some of her other stuff besides Eichmann in Jerusalem. I have a copy of The Human Condition that I bought during the quarantine, and I have only read the first chapter. It's just like so intense. So I have no idea how you've gotten through that, because I was a literature major in school and I'm still like, what is she saying?
Yeah, it's a pretty hard. You finish the book. I have to acknowledge I didn't finish all, but it's the most book is on my shelf, on my bookshelf. So it's I try to read her biography. It's because she has some romantic relationship with the
Heidegger.
Heidegger. Yeah, it's a very interesting, very intense.
She has a very dramatic life.
The best woman I admire in the world.
We've gotten so off track. So we're talking about Hannah Arendt. I think it's a worthwhile diversion though. But another thing that I just wanted to talk about, because I was really struck by this as well when I was visiting Minidoka. As someone also who has recently moved across the United States, we have such diverse geographical regions and different, there's deserts, there's where I grew up in Tennessee is almost a rainforest with how much precipitation we get in a year. And so I was also really struck by the landscape at the internment camp, because most of the people who were interned in Minidoka would have come from the Oregon, Washington state area. So very green. And then they're moved out to this desert. And the only water really near the camp is just an irrigation canal, because there's a lot of irrigation farming in that region of Idaho, because the volcanic soil is very fertile. There isn't enough water. So there's an irrigation canal kind of by the entrance of the camp. And so I was reading that the residents would often come and sit by the irrigation canal and listen to the water because it reminded them of home. And so I was just really struck by a quote from this letter that a resident named Hana, I'm going to totally butcher my Japanese pronunciation, so I apologize to everyone. Matsushita? I did all the syllables.
Sounds a Japanese name.
What?
Sounds like a Japanese name.
So she wrote a letter to her husband while she was interned, and I thought it was really beautiful. So I wanted to read it for our audience. She said, last night I walked to the riverbank. The clouds reflected in the water were beautiful, and the sagebrush on the plain was red with the sun. I cried and prayed to God while gazing at the setting sun. And so I was just really also struck by, I mean, it's easy to hear these huge numbers when you're talking about events like the Holocaust and internment and, policies on the southern border of thousands of migrants being detained. But I think it's also really important to get that human scale and think about what the individual experience of being taken from your home would have been like. So I wanted to share that.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's accidentally, both you and me at this podcast co-host, we didn't plan, but we travel on the Idaho at the same time. We didn't call each other, text each other, and find out we're in the same state. I don't know how I got landed in the Idaho. I flip a coin to say whenever any state I didn't travel, I'll go there. So it's the flip coin that drop to the Idaho. So I went to Idaho. You at the same time I'm there. And the same thing is the Snake River, and they have built a dam and put the irrigation the canal there and irrigated the farm there. It's the potato state. And for me, and we go too far away and bring back to our subject today. I think it's most important is we are going to emphasize the anti-Asian hate crime from a legal system, especially on the Attorney General level, in the federal level, but also to the county district attorney office, because most hate crime is going to be prosecuted by the prosecutors in each county. But at this moment, there's a very, very rare Asian attorney or Asian deputy attorney in prosecute this kind of hate crime. So they don't have a feeling of how dangerous, how fair of Asian community toward this kind of a crime. By default, it's very hard to define the hate crime. But from other side, at this moment, everyone is on the social media. So it's my suggestion to my attorney or my district attorney friends, or it's in the district attorney office, and the prosecutors, they can trace each individual offenders by search their social media and their violence, the language, hate language, those matters. That reflect their intention toward the Asian the community. It's a very, very indirect evidence. So we need a best attorney, best lawyer to participate in this social movement or social justice. I think it's the worst case. It's going to set up a very, very good case and to protect the Asian community in this country.
So wait, so you're saying that we should be searching through our like local attorney general's social media or just tagging them?
No, it's just we need to build some kind of a legal defense team and the lawyers team, and they use their legal expertise, try to trace offenders' social media, what's the past record they have done, because at the violence on site, people don't say, I hate you because you're Chinese, because you're Asian, and generally they just hate or stab or kill the people. But if you trace these offenders, the history on the social media, you can find the record. No the violence without any intention. Most people that have intention, just on site, it's very hard to prove they're guilty on the hate crime. But if you trace back and publish, you can bring the case back to the. Now if the people can stand on the protest on the district attorney office, doesn't work because you need some legal expertise to help you.
Yeah, we do have that really unique way to sort of like prosecute crimes now, which is that we can kind of see someone's thought process or like how they journey to coming to different conclusions by tracking their internet history, which could honestly be a whole episode just talking about that. So I want to close up with just one last question, having talked about the present and the past this week. And I just wanted to ask, how you think we're doing as a country at honoring or not honoring the past of and present of racism and xenophobia in the U.S.
I think this is I still waiting for the worst case happen. People say Atlantic massacre is the very, very tragedy, the big case. Even Obama has been tweeted 3 times, but I still feel this is the not worst case yet. So because if you don't have a direct evidence to prove this is a hate crime, it's a mingling with the religions, mixed with sex, and mixed with Asian as the majority victims, but it's not very clear. So I think it's of course, I don't want to expect it to happen, but things going to be coming worse and worse. Some cases going to coming out, and when we have a best lawyer and the best case, and I think it's the nation going to wake up, just like George Floyd, those kind of case. And I think that kind of case is going to happen to Asian communities soon. And then if it's happened, I think it's a national mobilized the social justice or legal system going to change. And the social progress is based on this kind of the worst scenario is coming out, and then that we can get the wake up of majority of our society.
Well, I hope that it doesn't take a dramatic crime, but you bring up such a good point about, test case litigation and all of that. So we're ending on kind of a sad and serious note today, but I enjoyed getting to talk with you as usual. And we will wrap it up there. So thanks for sharing your thoughts with me. And also, I'm sad we missed each other in Idaho.
Next time when you travel, let me know. And also, I'm going to share where I'm going to travel to. So we can at least know each other. It's where we will travel to.
Well, we'll wrap it there this week. My name is Katie Simpson. Our podcast is sponsored by Asian American Forward. You can visit our website at www.asianamericanforward.com. If you enjoyed the show this week or have a topic you'd like to hear us discuss on a future episode, send us your comments at info@asianamericanforward.com. We'd love to hear from you. You can also find us on Facebook and hear more conversations between Don and I at our YouTube channel. If you're a fan of the show, leave us a review in the Apple Podcast Store or tell someone about us. It really helps people find the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.